Hello, my name is John C., and I'm the Vice President of Professional Development for the Project Management Institute, New Jersey chapter. I want to welcome all of you to our webinar. These days, more and more companies are adopting agile practices like Scrum. For these companies, the issue of how to scale those practices throughout their organization is a very important and challenging one. So I want to extend a special welcome and appreciation to Dr. Jeff Sutherland for being here with us to present on the topic of achieving business agility with Scrum at scale. I trust that you will find Dr. Sutherland's presentation helpful and thought-provoking. For those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Jeff Sutherland, let me give you just a brief background on him. Dr. Sutherland helped write the Agile Manifesto and is the inventor and co-creator of Scrum, as well as the founder of Scrum Incorporated. He is also the creator of Scrum at Scale. Before that, Dr. Sutherland had a very exciting past, where he was a West Point graduate, a Top Gun U.S. Air Force pilot, a cancer researcher, as well as the CTO of 11 different software companies. Dr. Sutherland is also the author of several books, his most recent one being Scrum, the Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And now, Dr. Sutherland.
To deliver dealer commissions for selling Toyotas, a pretty important system. They had 200 people working on it for 5 years and had not delivered anything. We cut the team size to 20 people, split them into 3 Scrum teams, and delivered to production in 6 months. So we get a massive increase in capability with a massive decrease in cost by implementing Scrum at scale. Next slide, please. Back to traditional project management, where did it come from? Craig Larman wrote an interesting book on Agile project management. And in there, he interviewed the person that wrote the Department of Defense STD 2167, which specified the waterfall life cycle in the early 80s. And that specification, the majority of software at the time was funded by DoD in the United States, and everybody went to waterfall. Fast forward a few years, and Jasenbeck reported that 75% of these projects using this standard within the DoD had failed, or the results were never used. When Craig interviewed the writer of this specification, he said it really was a mistake, and he was not an expert in methodologies. He read a few books, he talked to a couple of consultants, and he wrote the standard. He said today he would not do that. He would be promoting iterative and incremental development, which is what Royce, in his 1970 paper that as the first waterfall paper, actually was not promoting the waterfall methodology, but he endorsed an evolutionary development as well. So it was obvious to me in 1983 when I left. I spent 11 years as a fighter pilot, then 11 years as a medical school professor, pulled into the banking industry. In medical school, I was doing research, massive computer simulations of biological systems, particularly the human cell, working with Bell Labs, and using the latest tools and technologies. And when I was pulled into the banking industry and looked at what they were doing, I tried to immediately change that, because it was not, all their projects were late, they were all over budget. We were running 150 banks. The CIOs were all screaming. So this was a huge problem, which I have spent 1983 trying to fix industry-wide. Next slide, please. Kernighan and Ritchie at Bell Labs, the inventors of C language and and Unix, I learned that the way to do it is with small cross-functional teams and delivering working prototypes in short iterations. And on Kernighan and Ritchie's teams, they had learned, because of a large study, actually culminating in over 200 published case studies of audits of best projects in the world, that research had shown that having multiple job titles slowed teams down. And so at Bell Labs, in the highest performing teams, they had eliminated all job titles, and they only had member of technical staff, and techniques they were using were far in advance of what's going on in the bank when I arrived there. Next slide, please. I was pulled into the bank as their head of advanced systems, essentially the CTO for 150 banks. What they were doing, they were managing their projects with Gantt charts, thousands of tasks. Things were always late, and as a mathematician, computer scientist coming out of a research background, I calculated the probability of projects being late. If you looked at thousands of tasks, each one with a name of date, what's the probability that a critical task slips and makes the project late? And that probability is virtually 1. And as a result, I went into the CEO's office and I said, "Hey, Ron, so your projects are late." And he said, "Every morning, at least 4 CIOs call me up and they scream at me." And I said, "Well, it's not getting better. It's every time it's late, the management has more reports, more meetings. It just makes it later." So he asked me, "Well, what should I do about it?" And at the time, I was reading a book called In Search of Excellence, a bestseller. And I actually tore a chapter right out of the book and threw it on his desk. And I said, "We should do this. Basically, business unit and create a completely different operating system for building projects." So I said, let's take the worst business unit in the bank. We can't do it all at once. And let's fix that unit. We'll then build a reference model, which we can roll out to the rest of the bank. Next slide, please. The business unit that we took was the automated teller systems, which were at that time a newer technology, was being rolled out to 150 banks all over North America, US, Canada. It was supporting thousands of teller systems, all brands. We wrote the assembler code for every brand of teller system. Mainframes in the back end were big Burroughs mainframes in multiple sites all across the United States. We had a tandem nonstop system with multiple processors that was doing the switching of the transactions from the ATM machines into the back end mainframes. And I actually had a grant from the Kellogg Foundation, a leadership grant. And I brought 6 or 7 professors from business schools into the bank and had them look at the problem. And their recommendation was to create an entrepreneurial company, a startup, like a startup within the bank with this new operating model. And so that's what we did. Next slide, please. Based it on these fundamental principles, a bias for action, close to the customer, autonomy and entrepreneurship, productivity through people, hands-on, value-driven, to the knitting, simple form, lean staff, simultaneously loose, tight properties. Same kind of principles you see in the original paper on Scrum by Takeuchi Nanaka, and that was written in 1986. And then many years later, we show up at the Agile Manifesto meeting in 2001. Agile Manifesto values and principles are very much aligned with these principles that were used to actually implement the first prototype of Scrum Scale in 1983. Next slide, please. It was, I pulled every person that touched anything having to do with the ATM systems. the salespeople, the marketing people, the finance people, the software developers, the system support people, the install, and so forth, everyone into one unit. I said, we're going to break it down into small teams of 4 or 5 people. Every morning, we'll have product manager come in and prioritize everything by business value. And Friday afternoons, we will deploy everything. And if it's software, it will be deployed to 150 banks every Friday afternoon. And I said, I know you guys are going to have problems with this. I said, but I used to train fighter pilots how to land aircraft, which I flew for many years. And you have to practice over and over again. You're trying to come down the glide path high. They have to come around and try it again. So I said, we're going to be doing that, and we're going to do it until we can nail it. We can land that project right at the end of the runway. Friday afternoon, everything is live, and there are no problems. It took us 6 weeks to actually land the project on Friday afternoon properly. Next slide. The effect of that was we started with the cost exceeding revenue by 30%, and within 6 months, revenue was exceeding cost by 30%. It became the most profitable business unit in the bank. This then became the prototype from which we've implemented Scrum at scale in many institutions year after year up until the present time. And in the last couple of years, I've written down a Scrum at scale guide consistent with the Scrum guide that Ken Schwaber and I maintain for Scrum. The Scrum at scale guide is how do you implement the Scrum guide when you have teams, hundreds of teams, even thousands of teams. SAP, for example, has over 2,000 teams running Scrum at scale. Next slide. Implementing this, here's just one more recent implementation at a publicly traded company, Pegasystems. 2009, we came in there and started implementing Scrum at scale. It went global very fast within a few months. And as we're doing it, the stock price goes up 400%. And they got busy acquiring companies with their new valuation. And for a couple of years, the stock is just bouncing around. I kept on telling them, you're not done yet. They finally brought me back in to meet with the product owners, and we fixed the product owners, and the stock jumped another 400%. So the purpose of Scrum at scale is to drive business agility, and that will reflect an increased valuation of companies. And if it's publicly traded, stock price will go up. And I have many examples of that. Next slide. 2006, I was brought into OpenView Venture Partners to help them implement Scrum in all their venture companies. Their goal was to use Scrum to actually double their investment return compared to competitive venture capital companies. And as soon as we started training them in Scrum, they realized a way of working that works for any domain, not just software. And so the CEO of the venture firm immediately implemented Scrum across the company. Everybody was on a Scrum team. The investors, the team supporting companies, and admin people, everyone. And we have over almost $1 billion invested today in about 47 late-stage startups. Some of them we've sold off. We sold one for $2.7 billion to Salesforce.com, and we only make investments of 10 or 15 million. If you look at our latest funding round, we typically go in rounds of about 200 million. This was the 4th round. Last year, its valuation went from 200 million to 500 million in 1 year. The returns are significantly better than most venture companies. And this is across the entire spectrum of all our companies. It's not just one heavy hitting company. Next slide, please. The reason that you would want to be able to do this is because today, disruption that's going on is massive. So, for example, I was doing Scrum training in Japan or in Germany. I'm going to Japan next week, but in Germany, a group from the largest bank in Germany was in the class. And they told me that Amazon was doing loans in Germany and that they could figure out of a customer in 3 seconds, give a loan in 3 minutes. And that meant, as a bank, since it took them 3 weeks, exit the business. And they were doing as many startups as they could, trying to find an area where they would be able to compete in the future with Amazon. So this is tremendously disruptive for the banking industry. The same thing is true in shipping. Worked with the largest shipping company, Maersk, the senior management. I said, "Who's your competition?" They said, "Amazon." Buying airplanes. They're leasing all the ships to China, okay? In talking to the people that ship packages, I found that replacing all the people shipping packages in New York City. One FedEx competitor I talked to had lost 100% of their business in New York City to Uber. Automotive, I've already mentioned that. Ford is getting out of the car business. They are shutting down plants, so is General Motors. Utilities, wind and solar are cheaper. Batteries can take you off the grid. The utilities are being disrupted. Energy, projected that by 2023, the utilization of oil will start going down as the electrification of automobiles expands. And every industry today is being eaten by AI and robotics, replacing human workers, dynamically changing the dimensions of industry. So if you want to compete in the modern world, you're going to have to be faster, better, cheaper, and more agile than you are today. Next slide, please. Give you an example of massive disruption. I'm in a house right now, produces $12,000 a year of energy. Massachusetts pays me $11,000 in energy credits every year. I've got an application in for a geothermal system, which also runs electricity. I'm going to get paid probably $8,000 for that. So I am making 2380. I'm making $31,000 a year. Solar panels on my roof. Tesla's putting power walls in the house, which will take the house off the grid. I will remain connected to the grid in case I need energy during the middle of the winter. When, if there's snow in the panels in the middle of the winter, I'm not going to be generating much energy. I'll be able to pull it off the grid. But I always have an energy surplus. I'm running right now about $5,000 or $6,000 in energy credits from the utility that they owe me. I'll have to provide through the winter. So all my energy is free. The payback is about 4 years before you're running completely free. I have electric cars. I have no need for oil, no need for gasoline. And the energy credits are big enough to pay for my cars. I'm going to have to donate some energy. The way it works here in Massachusetts, the company will give me credit, but they won't pay me for it. So I'm going to have to donate it to the local church, some of my surplus, okay? So people haven't figured this out yet, but as soon as people actually start figuring this out, the utilities are going to be turning upside down. Next slide. In response to this, we are working with many, many companies doing agile transformations in automotive, in healthcare, everywhere. And Ford's wrote down some numbers on what they see. 47% of these transformations fail. And MIT Sloan Business Review did an analysis of what happens when they fail. And they say 75% of them are terminal. The company goes out of business or bankrupt. Look at the tooling for these agile transformations. 80% of it is Scrum. It's pretty much Scrum is the dominant way of approaching these. You can see in other charts that many different parts of organizations are getting agile, and company leadership, the leadership of companies and industry, the more agile they are across all their different domains and business units, the more leadership position they are in their industry. Okay, so agility makes you leaders. I had a woman from Apple in a class a couple of weeks ago. She said, "Jeff, Apple does Scrum exactly by your book, working half the time." That's why Apple is so successful. Okay, people who can do this, they dominate industry. Microsoft keeps on popping to the most valuable company in the world. With Apple, what is Microsoft based on? Scrum. All development tooling at Microsoft is Scrum. So this is where the leadership is going to come from the future. Next slide, please. The reason that they fail is that people are not implementing it properly. So here's data on 50,000 project sets, each set with 8 to 25 projects. So these are many hundreds of thousands of projects split into traditional versus agile. And what it shows is the agile success rate is almost twice the traditional success rate, but the agile, 50% of them are late, over budget, unhappy customers, 8% failures. So 50% of agile projects deliver. And if you go in and look at the major reason why is that they say they're doing agile, but it's just BS. Next slide, please. It's so bad that the US law today says that all Department of Defense projects must be agile. They created a Defense Innovation Board with many distinguished, mostly computer scientists. Eric Schmidt, for example, the former CEO of Google. Lander, who founded the Broad Institute. Those are the CRISPR people. I have my coaches down there almost every day at the Broad Institute. It's a big Scrum operation. They're doing DNA sequencing with Scrum. And they wrote a paper. Here are the questions you need to ask any vendor that submits a proposal for an agile project for the government. Number one, are the teams delivering working software to real users every iteration, including the first iteration? If yes, the project should be evaluated. If no, it should go into the Agile BS bucket. Is feedback from users turned into real changes in requirements, at least on a monthly cycle? If yes, that's an Agile project. If no, that goes into the Agile BS bucket, and so forth. There's about 20 questions they have in there. And what you can see from the previous data, 58% of so-called Agile projects out there are Agile BS. They're not delivering stuff every iteration. They're not adapting the requirements to the users, and so forth. So next slide. The solution to eliminating the Agile BS is first implementing the Scrum Guide, and then for multiple teams, implementing the Scrum Scale Guide, which is totally consistent with the Scrum Guide. Next slide, please. Scale, the way we approach it, we look at the operations of an organization, and we look at two different interlocking processes. One is the prioritization part of the organization, what we call the product owner cycle. Product owners need a vision. Where are they going to take the organization? The prioritize projects, products, portfolios across the organization. And then they need to drive down for specific products and decompose that backlog to feed it to teams. And then they need to have a release plan delivering to customers. On the operations side, we have the Scrum Master cycle. The team level process is critical, getting that working, then continuously improving, coordinating across many different teams, deploying the product, and then from the product release cycle, getting feedback from the customer. Part of making this all work is on the product owner side, having a leadership team that can prioritize everything in the organization. On the operating side, having a leadership team that is responsible for the agile implementation of the organization. The best ones we've seen, these executive teams actually run as a Scrum team. So this is the model we use. And then the goal of Scrum at Scale is how to optimize the performance of the organization as a whole. Next slide, please. And not only in number of teams, but we have to deal with virtually all organizations are distributed today. They have people in multiple locations. We want to saturate the organization as much as possible with Scrum. The more we can saturate the organization with Scrum, the data show the leadership of that company will be higher if Scrum is implemented not only in IT, but throughout the organization. And fourth, just as we demonstrated in that example from Toyota, our goal is not to add more people, but to add more velocity of production to the enterprise. Often that is reducing the number of people to do that. Next slide, please. To scale without losing productivity per person or productivity per team, scale-free architecture. We see many of those in biological systems. That's my background. I was modeling biological systems on a supercomputer, okay? So these systems can scale to, your body has about 37 trillion cells. Systems can scale quite large and still be highly functional. So the question is, how can we scale the number of teams within an organization, not lose productivity per team? That is the big challenge for, it has been the biggest challenge in software development since its beginning. Next slide, please. So in order to make that architecture scale-free, we have to worry about decision time. The latest research from the Standish Group shows that the time to make a decision is the primary driver of project success. Decision time in the average in a company is less than an hour. Success rate is 58%. If it's more than 5 hours, success rate drops to 18%. That is bigger than the difference between Agile and Waterfall, okay? Latency, the Standish Group thinks, is the key to why Scrum and Scrum at Scale works. And we get faster decisions by pushing as many decisions as possible down to the teams, having strong product owners that can turn around a prioritization decision within the hour, and having leadership teams at the executive level for operations and for prioritization. They're meeting at least every sprint, ideally from the operations side every day, turn around a major decision within a few hours. Next slide, please. This is what makes projects work, fast decision times. The way we've implemented the Scrum at Scale guide, the cards you have here are actually been developed by Ivar Jakobsen International, who owns the standard for defining methodologies. And they've taken the guide and created a set of cards that describe all the pieces. And Scrum at Scale is based on self-organization, just as an individual Scrum team, and cross-functional teams. And it implements the Scrum pillars, transparency, inspection, and adaptation, and the Scrum values, commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect. This is kind of the base level of capability that you need to get started. Next slide, please. Scale, we have to be really careful that we don't create extra roles and we don't create extra teams. As we scale with a Scrum team has a product owner. We have a set of teams. That set of teams is going to be delivering a unified product, a chief product owner. And at the organizational level, there's going to be a chief product owner team for the organization. Similarly, for the Scrum Masters, for a set of teams, there'll be a Scrum of Scrum Master, a coach of coaches. And for the organization, there'll be an enterprise Scrum Master, enterprise action team. So everything is Scrum from top to bottom. There is no other model. There are no separate teams that aren't Scrum. Next slide, please. Organization, at the top of the organization, we implement a pattern called a meta Scrum. And to do that, we need an executive meta Scrum team. That includes the chief product owner for the enterprise and his teams and his product owner team, and all the stakeholders that can make commitments for the organization, financial and otherwise. And they need to be meeting on a regular cadence and prioritizing everything that's going on in the organization. Next slide, please. Picture of, we have almost 100 case studies on the Scrum Scale website from different trainers around the world that are certified trainers. And when you create a picture of an organization, it looks something like this, where teams are broken down into product groups. Each product group has a chief product owner team and a Scrum of Scrum's Masters. And at the top of the organization, we have these executive teams for prioritization and for operations. Next slide, please. Things that we train the executives on is Moneyball. Okay, Moneyball was the name of a book about the Oakland A's baseball team. They hired a statistician. They were losing most of the games. They hired a statistician. The statistician said, most of the runs are gotten by people that just get to first base. So only hire those people. Don't hire the home run hitters, because they're very expensive and they don't get most of the runs. Within 1 year after implementing that policy, Oakland was number 2 in the league, and their salaries were significantly less than average. What is the Moneyball of project management? Next slide, please. What we've learned over the years, and now that we've done Scrum at Scale in many large companies, is as soon as an enterprise meta Scrum team prioritizes all the projects in a company, at Toyota there were 324, as soon as you look at them, immediately that the bottom 30% should not be done. They have no significant value. They're a distraction. For example, an IT services group that was implementing Scrum at Scale, prioritized everything in the organization. They found the work they were doing was Windows 7 support, and almost everybody going to Windows 10. So in one afternoon, they freed up 300 people. Okay. This happens every time we actually can get an organization to prioritize. That bottom 30% should not be done. For the things that could possibly provide value, we have extensive data over the last 2 decades in the software domain showing that 64% of the features are never or rarely used. Scrum, we have a strong product owner that is working to stop building that stuff. stuff the customer will use, that's at the top 25% of what organizations are implementing. And for that, we want the Scrum Masters to optimize the efficiency of production. Next slide, please. The things that I'm talking a lot to Scrum teams about today is process efficiency. We had some trouble getting Toyota functional last year, and so I told my teams, focus on process efficiency. It's a fundamental metric to the Toyota way. Every person at Toyota is supposed to know the process efficiency of whatever they're doing, and they're supposed to be improving it. Efficiency is the actually value-added work time divided by the clock time it takes to get done. The only company I've found that really knows process efficiency of their Scrum teams is General Electric, and they know that's 5%, which is really low. The definition of lean is 25%. What we know is that if you raise that process efficiency, you would radically improve the velocity of teams. If we can just get that process efficiency up to the lean level, significantly increase production, that by itself is probably enough to get you doing twice the work in half the time. Please. Mention back to process efficiency because I don't have this slide in here. A team in India, I was working remotely with them. Process efficiency of your stories is in your Scrum tool. You have the data already. You do not need to collect any other data. Collect that data and put it as an item when you open up your Scrum tool. You want to see the running process efficiency of a story. And in their tool, started a sprint. It was running at around 5 or 10% on Monday. By Wednesday, they had it to 80%. And on Friday morning, they were done with everything in a 2-week sprint. In 4 days. It was really funny. They called me up and they said, Jeff, we don't know what to do. We have no more backlog. We're going to have to go to management, find out what to do. I said, where's your product owner? I told you this was going to happen, you know. But it shows that it is so easy to fix this. If a remote team in India can fix this in 4 days, your teams out there and companies can do it in the same time frame. What we find is when we go into Scrum implementations, the way that most companies are working, they have Waterfall management managing the Agile implementation. And they want all the traditional Waterfall reports, traditional Waterfall metrics. And that cripples the implementation. In fact, Professor Carter, the leading change expert at Harvard, says in his book, Accelerate, he has never seen a sustainable Agile transformation with Waterfall leadership. Never happened. Slide, please. In order to get a sustainable implementation, if you want to be operating like Salesforce or Microsoft or Apple or SAP, it has to move to the side and support the Agile implementation. Teams need to be driven by the product backlog, which the product owner organization is responsible for. And that way, we can get a sustainable Agile implementation that actually works. But that is a very small percentage of Agile transformations today. The reason 47% of them fail is mainly because of the Waterfall leadership. They do not have Agile leadership. Next slide, please. Going back to Toyota, this is how it works. You don't have to change the whole company at once. Toyota is a very hierarchical company. Also understand that you need to form cross-functional teams to innovate. So when he said, we looked at the 200 people working on the dealer commissioning system, and we interviewed them. We realized that the people doing the real work, there were only 20 of them. We only want those 20 people. We put them together in a Scrum Scale model. There were 3 teams with a leadership team that is really a team of teams. It's made up of members of the teams. They had a leadership team for prioritization, a leadership team for operations, the EMS and the EAT. And that model was what enabled them to do in 6 months with 20 people what 200 people couldn't do in 5 years. Please. We have many examples of this in the Scrum Field Book. We have many case studies up on the Scrum at Scale website. I invite all of you to take a look at that. Next slide, please. 2-day courses on Scrum at Scale and all over the world. There's about 100 Scrum at Scale trainers all over the world now delivering these courses. In the course, we build a heat map. How well is the organization functioning? So every column is an organization, and every row is a component in the Scrum at Scale framework. So you can see there's a lot of red in there where things are not working. And so what we want to do is have a plan to change the organization to a better way of working, systematically going after, okay, what is the biggest problem? Let's address that first. You can't fix everything at once. We systematically scrum the entire organization. We train people to do that in the Scrum at Scale course. Next slide, please. I'll be doing one in Tokyo in a couple of weeks. I'll be in Stuttgart a few weeks after that. I'll be in Detroit in March. But there are many other courses by many other trainers. Also do a lot of work training the trainers. The next Train the Trainer session for really want to be Scrum at Scale certified trainers be in Boston at the beginning of January. And the major requirement for that is to have an actual transformation. It's been very interesting. We found that about half of the people doing Scrum training do not have an actual transformation that can create a case study that would even make them eligible for being a Scrum at Scale trainer. A lot of scrumming out there that really is not tapped into the best way of doing it, and particularly the best way of doing it at scale. That's the last slide. Maybe we can open it up to some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sutherland. I'm looking at the Q&A over here. That was very insightful and very informative. In this day and age, if I may ask, it's a very popular question. There are a lot of scaling certifications and courses out there. Is there anything we could compare amongst this? So I think you really touched upon the history of this even before we had something called Scrum at Scale formally. There was a lot going on prior. But could you just comment generally on any of the other scaling techniques or what's out there?
Yeah. So Scrum at Scale is an organizational operating system. Scaling techniques out there are IT frameworks, building software. So one of our most interesting Scrum at Scale case studies is the country of Gibraltar, who does a massive amount of gaming. Most of the gaming companies in Europe are registered in Gibraltar. It's just like Delaware is the state in the United States where these operate. So they have a massive scaled Scrum run by Scrum at Scale. In their IT organizations, they have one large IT organization is using SAFe, another one's using LESS. But over in sales and marketing, those are totally useless, right? So sales and marketing, they're Scrum at Scale. the executive team, they're Scrum at Scale. Everything is prioritized across the organization with Scrum at Scale. So Scrum at Scale is a meta framework. It's an umbrella that allows you to run organization. So it's radically different than the other scaling frameworks, which are mainly focused on IT.
Thank you for that.
There was a few questions in there about the slides. This PDF copy of the slide deck will be posted on the PMI website along with the recording. And another question came up with name of the organization that documents frameworks.
The name of the, Ivar Jacobsen International. And they have developed these, the international standard for documented frameworks is called Essence. So they've created these Essence cards for many different frameworks. And they came to me 2 or 3 years ago and they said, we need to do the right set of cards for Scrum. And so we worked together and initially did the ones for Scrum. Now we're working on Scrum at Scale. Again, it's the biggest SAFe provider in Europe, which is primarily an IT framework. Ivar was the inventor of use cases, the inventor of the rational unified process, which many of your project leaders will remember. Also, one of the inventors of UML. So he's a very distinguished computer scientist. And he wanted to get Scrum right, which is why he worked with me on the Essence cards for Scrum. And he wants his trainers to be trained in Scrum at Scale. So when they get these big operations like the country of Gibraltar, SAFe is not going to work for all of that. Scrum at Scale as a way to work particularly outside the IT domain, but also as an umbrella or IT frameworks.
There's another question here. You mentioned a full, it goes beyond just IT. There's a question about life sciences and or medical devices. How would this fit?
Okay, so Scrum Inc. right now has consultants at almost every biotech company, which is one of the major centers of biotech. I have consultants working in all the major hospitals, doing innovation in hospitals. As I said, the Broad Institute, who are the CRISPR people doing DNA sequencing, they have one of the best Scrum implementations in biotech. So this is being used widely in medical research. I ran the first FDA project in 1996. Radiology system had to be certified by the FDA, and we deployed a brand new product within 6 months. The cost of it was less than half of what would have cost us if we used the traditional way of working with FDA compliance, because what we did was we put FDA compliance, which is mainly traceability, into the definition of done for every story. So at the end of every sprint, every story implemented had to be completely FDA compliant. So by the last sprint, there was no extra work to do. The FDA they approved it. I cut 95% of the cost out of FDA compliance, Scrum. And we're seeing that in medical device companies all over the world that know how to do this well.
Another question about spiral methodology. Like how would you compare, scale to that?
You mean the waterfall spiral, Barry Bohm spiral? Yeah. Well, Barry started moving the waterfall towards iterations in the very first Scrum paper that Ken and I worked on in 1995, presented it at Uppsala 95. Compares spiral to Scrum. It compares several, but I'll give you an example. A large consulting company called me up recently and they said, we just finished our first Agile project. It took 6 months to do the first spiral. Done, the customer said, well, it's not what we wanted. You didn't meet our visions and goals. accept that. They said, what did we do wrong? I said, well, did you meet with a customer at the end of every sprint and allow them to change requirements based on what they're seeing? They said, no. I said, well, then you had an Agile BS project. That's what the Defense Innovation Board says is Agile BS. It means you're involving the customer directly in product development. Every iteration, most teams are doing 2 weeks, a lot of teams going to 1 week iterations. The customer gets to put their input into the system and you can change the requirements, okay? Spiral does not allow that. That's not the way that works.
Some questions came up. What I'm doing is I'm going through the questions. There's more than we have time for here. I mean, you really generated a lot of interest. For contract negotiation, most SOWs are geared toward waterfall projects. How do you break that habit, as far as if you want to do a Scrum at scale type of contract?
One of the most interesting companies in the world I work with is a CMMI 5 company, very high process maturity. Back in 2006, they had me come in and train some Scrum Masters. They said, it took us 10 years to get to CMI 5. We can do a perfect waterfall better than 98% of the time. They're up to 99.5 perfect. Either waterfall or Scrum, doesn't matter. But they said, we're going to introduce Scrum as a process improvement CMI 5 implementation. And so they did about a dozen pilot projects over a 6-month period. They found that every project half as much to produce whatever they were working on, and they had 40% fewer defects, plus or minus 3% in all projects. Okay, we're going to offer our customers a choice, and they work on big defense projects, both in Europe and the United States, as well as big government healthcare projects, financial projects. So we're going to offer every customer a choice. Here's the waterfall proposal. That's 20 million euro. Scrum proposal. Same thing, CMI 5 is 10 million euro. Only difference between the two projects is that the Scrum version has 40% fewer defects. It's your choice. You choose. The customers did. They all want the half price project, right? I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Coming up at the top of the hour, and I wanted to show a couple of slides from PMI New Jersey, and also thank Jeff for his time. So, we're just about at the end run here. So, John, I will share the presentation.
My screen now?
I'll do it.
Fantastic. Let me just launch this into PowerPoint presentation mode.
I'm sharing it.
Okay, so I know that there were over 430 people registering for this meeting, and I know that there may be a good number of you who are not familiar with Project Management Institute or our chapter. So I just wanted to take a brief moment here to tell you a little bit about our organization. So Project Management Institute is the world's leading not-for-profit professional membership association for the project management profession. And so it's a global leader in knowledge and resource and in terms of global standards. And so some of you may have heard of the project management body of knowledge, as well as credentials. Our most popular certification being the Project Management Profession, or PMP. PMI also has collaborative communities that are online that you can join, as well as they conduct research and produce reports on the profession called Pulse of the Profession to talk about the trends and where project management is going in the years to come. We're a large organization. We have over 580,000 members in over 212 countries and territories. So we're truly international. And there are 301 chapters. So wherever you may be, I'm sure you can find a chapter that's not too far away from you. Now, the membership to join PMI for each year is $129, although for your first year of membership, there'll be an additional $10. And you can find out more information about PMI, the website pmi.org. Also, I want to tell you a little bit about our chapter, which is the Project Management Institute of New Jersey. So we've been around since 1982. We have over 5,500 members. We are the second largest PMI chapter in the United States, third largest in the world. And our members represent over 1,400 companies and organizations. And our members are not just in New Jersey. We have members, of course, in the neighboring states of New York and Pennsylvania. We have members as far away as India, Florida, California, and even Australia. So what we have is that for our members is that we have monthly meetings, and these are either at a particular site where you can see the speaker and it's a dinner meeting, or if you can't come, we're constantly adding to our satellite sites where you can dial in from remotely. We also have 2 symposiums a year, one in May and one upcoming in November called the IPM Day, which I will talk about a little bit more in a moment. We have training classes. In fact, we have an upcoming PMI ACP certification for those of you who are interested in it. And we also offer workshops. We also offer mentorship program for those who want to improve on their project management skills or have particular challenges that they want to get some advice on working for. And unlike some other organizations that have a mentorship program, ours is free for our members. We also have webinars such as this presentation by Dr. Jeff Sutherland. And this webinar, like many of our other meetings, are recorded so that you can watch them again, or if you miss them, you can catch them for the first time. We also offer help with careers in terms of career fairs. We have job and resume posting. And we're not just only internally focused. Our organization is also outwardly focused. So we do work also for Habitat for Humanity, Future City Competitions, which is for middle school students. We help out with the Franklin Township Food Bank. We make presentations at companies like Merck. And we also work with schools like Rutgers University and Montclair State University. Now, the membership dues to become a member of PMI New Jersey is only $25 a year. Of course, that's on top of your PMI membership. And so if you want to learn more about our chapter, go to our website, which is www.pminj.org. My last slide here, I want to tell you about this upcoming International Project Management Day Symposium that we're having up next week on November 7th. It'll be at the Palace at Somerset Park. And the theme for this year is Leadership in Disruptive Times. And so our featured keynote speaker is Sunil Prashara, who is our newly appointed president and CEO of the PMI Global Organization. And his presentation will be PMI, the next 50 years. And in addition to Mr. Prashara presenting, we also have 4 other speakers presenting, as well as our New Jersey chapter's Project of the Year winners from PMINJ. Now, because you are here participating in this presentation tonight, we made available to you a special discount code, which is here in the bottom of the screen, which is ADG50. And if you go to our website and you register now by November 2nd, you will save $50 off the current registration price. So that's a fantastic saving, and I encourage you to take advantage of that. So with that, I will hand the time back over to you, Bob.
Thanks. Real quick, just looking ahead for Agile opportunities. During IPM Day, we're going to have an Agile LCI booth. And at the booth, there's going to be some fun handouts. This is the 12 principles of Agile. This is Agile values, the 4 values. Jeff's been talking about these things throughout the presentation. And then this is the Scrum values. And these are nice handouts you can grab. And also new this time, we also have a Scrum reference guide, which is a nice, nicely laminated guide that goes through all the different parts of Scrum. These are all handouts that will be available. The next Agile discussion group will be the last Wednesday of the month, on November 30th. And John already mentioned the ACP training class. With that, that's all the advertisements. And Jeff, do you have a time for a few more questions, or we're definitely a little bit past the hour?
If there's any burning questions out there, I'd be glad to answer them.
One of them that I saw was, if you're in an organization, stop Waterfall. You know, especially like if management is really behind it and really pushing it, what kind of things can you do as an Agilist to actually help the organization out of that mindset?
Well, I think, you know, it's usually not the top of the organization that's a problem these days, because the senior leadership knows they have to move faster to be more competitive. Middle management. And when we're training Scrum Masters, lots of the times they feel handicapped, but they're not very good at negotiating, because if you go to a manager and say, you know, we could give you twice as much product, deliver at lower cost, and it would be a much higher quality product. Do you want that? Most managers will say yes. And as soon as they say yes, you're into a negotiation. Well, here's how it would need to work. How I would need you to support this to get this. And then they might say, well, that doesn't follow our waterfall project management guidelines. And the Scrum Master should just say, well, then you're going to get half the work in twice the time with the current guidelines, and that's what we'll give you. Most managers then are bothered by that. They want to come back and more about it. And it really is I mean, I was talking to a CIO some years ago at National Public Radio, and I asked him, I said, how are your projects doing? Are they all on time? He laughed. He said, no. And I said, I bet you a $5 million project cost you at least $7 million. The whole staff started laughing. I asked them, why are you laughing? They said, because there is no $5 million project that doesn't cost over $10 million before we're done. So I said to him, well, I gave you a way of working where all the projects came in on time and on budget. Will you be interested? He's going to say yes. Okay, then I systematically step through what we need to do. That's usually enough to at least get some good pilot projects launched to see if it actually works. If it starts working, then you can usually expand it. So it's a long process of education. But the good news is that the competition is becoming so fierce as more and more companies become agile. The management sticks to a strong, traditional, slow methodology, already in big trouble. So, at BMW this last few months, had to step down. Why does he have to step down? They're losing market share. That's why. Why are they losing market share? Agile enough. I know their agile leadership. They tell me that they have about 3 years to really get agile. These cars connected to the internet, electrified, or they're going to be in a world of hurt. Don't do that. They're going to be like Ford Motor Company getting out of the car business. Know that. So for a lot of companies today, there are not a lot of options.
When I went to your class in Washington, I brought back, doing twice the work in half the time. And my management team wasn't a believer, but I actually implemented it, and the team productivity increased by like 300%, and I was able to demonstrate it. And so, it's really a powerful thing when you do it right. It's just wonderful. And I could keep you on all night with these questions. One person is they're very heavily into ITIL processes. And they were just wondering if you had any experience with organizations that are very high into the IT service management, ITIL stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there are people trying to implement Scrum in those, ITIL, Prince2 in Europe, these other frameworks, even CMMI. When you look at what are the goals of these frameworks, the goal is to usually examine what's happening on a regular basis and make decisions. What happens when you implement Scrum, you get a lot more decision points. You get a decision point effectively. You get a gate at the end of every sprint. You get a lot more opportunities to assess quality, to make decisions, and to change course. And for example, CMI, which I know a lot about, having worked with these CMI 5 companies, 5 does not prevent you from being agile at all. Their goals are to have a good standard process that works. And with CMI 5, with with just Scrum, with a few of the technical engineering practices, implemented standard across teams, you are automatically at CMI 3. And I think with ITIL and Prince 2, there are ways of figuring out how to do that as well. I would recommend they look at companies, ITIL-based companies that are using Scrum, because there are a lot of them around the world. And how have they worked around the issues that come up in that?
Well, this is the last one. Any experience with building construction? You gave a great example.
I was in the Netherlands recently. They were telling me they were building a bridge with Scrum. I know a lot of people who have done major renovations on homes where they've used Scrum. You know, I have a daily meeting every morning with the contractors, every backlog, and the people that have done this, they bring in these projects. I mean, there was one in the Netherlands where the Scrum coach did this, brought his project in on time, on budget. The same contractor went down the street, neighbors, same thing. It went over budget by 2x, and it took twice as much time because they weren't scrumming the construction. We have one of the fascinating case studies we have in Scrum Scale is actually for drilling wells in Colombia. Scrum. Well, drilling a well is a massive logistics kind of thing. You not only have to do the exploration, but then when you decide, you have to move all this equipment through the jungle. It all has to come out there at the right time, and then you punch the hole. And they are drilling wells now in 20% of the time on the average as they used to drill wells before with Scrum, because it manages the logistics of the construction of the well hole, basically, because a lot of problems in construction have to do with timing. You know, the plumber doesn't show up at the right time, or the electrician, and so forth. You Scrum it, it works much better. My wife is calling me for dinner, so I think we better.
Well, thank you for giving us the extra 15 minutes. We really appreciate your time tonight, Jeff. I think a lot of the comments in here were well done. Thank you. Great presentation. There's a lot of great feedback here. So thank you again on behalf of the PMI chat.
Thanks for inviting me.